The fire started at 2 in the morning. I woke up to my dog barking like mad, and the smell of smoke pouring in through the cracked window of my bedroom. I shot out of bed, heart racing, ran outside barefoot, and there it was. My family's cabin, the one my grandfather built with his own 2 hands back in the 60s, was fully engulfed in flames. The old pine logs, dry as paper, lit up like a stack of matches. The roof caved in as I stood there, helpless, the heat stinging my face. I could hear the crackling, the groaning of timber and memories melting into ash. Fire trucks showed up 15 minutes too late. No saving it. Everything my father left behind when he passed gone. I live on a private plot up in the hills of Northern California, just outside a small gated community called Pine Crest Ridge. My grandfather's cabin sat just over the property line, technically outside the HOA's jurisdiction. But that hadn't stopped them from trying to control it. For the last 3 years, they'd been harassing me nonstop, and it always came from one person, Cheryl Mathers. She's the HOA president. Mid-50s. Platinum blonde bob, wears sunglasses even when it's raining, drives a white SUV like it's a tank. The woman is a tyrant with a clipboard and a megaphone. Nothing happens in Pine Crest Ridge without her approval, and she'll remind you of that every chance she gets. She hated my cabin, said it was an eyesore from across the ridge. Claimed it lowered neighborhood value. Never mind that it wasn't technically part of the HOA. That didn't stop her from sending me letters, threats, and even once calling code enforcement on me. They showed up, looked embarrassed, and left after checking the property lines. Still, she kept pushing, and now the cabin was gone, burned to the ground. I stood there in the morning light, breathing in the smell of wet ash, watching the last wisps of smoke curl into the sky, and I knew this wasn't some freak accident. I knew Cheryl did this. She didn't light the match herself. She wasn't that stupid. But I could feel it in my gut this was her doing. What she didn't know was that I wasn't going to take this lying down. My name's Xander Voss. I'm not some pushover. I work in logistics, but I spent 8 years in military intelligence before that. I know how to track things. I know how to dig. And I've got a long fuse, but once it's lit, it only burns one way. The next day, I started digging. First, I went to the fire chief. He confirmed what I already suspected. Accelerants were used, he said. No sign of a natural cause. Fire started in 3 separate places. Arson, no question. I asked if they had any leads. You'd be surprised how often this happens around HOA properties, he said, lowering his voice. You didn't hear it from me, but Pine Crest Ridge has had 2 other accidental fires in the last 5 years. Both were homes in dispute with the HOA. That was all I needed to hear. I dug through my files. I kept everything, every notice mailed to me by the HOA, every nasty letter Cheryl ever hand-delivered onto my porch. She even once threatened to sue me for the unauthorized structure on private land. The structure, a shed I built for storing firewood, I had the permits, didn't matter. Then I remembered something. 3 weeks ago, I caught someone sneaking around the edge of my property at night. I'd installed motion-activated security cameras after the last time someone slashed my tires. I checked the footage again, scrubbing through hours until I found it there. A shadowy figure, hooded, walking along the fence line behind the cabin. I brightened the footage. It was grainy, but enough to make out a patch on the hoodie sleeve. Pine Crest Ridge security. Thing is, Pine Crest Ridge doesn't have security. Just a guy named Doug, a retired mailman who drives around in a golf cart with a walkie-talkie. They'd never issued uniforms. That meant someone had custom clothing made. Someone who wanted to look official. I printed the footage, filed a report with the local sheriff, and then called in a favor from an old buddy of mine at the bureau. His name's Colin. He works white-collar crimes but has a soft spot for exposing corruption. You said HOA? He asked. You'd be shocked how many of these so-called community associations are little more than rackets with landscaping. He agreed to take a look. It wasn't long before he called me back. Xander, he said, you're not wrong. I started pulling their financials, this Cheryl woman. She's been misusing HOA funds for years. Lavish dinners, home upgrades, even paid for her niece's college tuition under community outreach. And get this, she pushed a vote to create a fire mitigation fund last year. Guess where that money went? I didn't even need to answer. It was time to go public. I contacted my neighbors, the ones who didn't bow down to Cheryl. Turns out, a lot more people hated her than I realized. A man named Greg, who'd lived here for 20 years, told me Cheryl forced him to repaint his home 3 times in one summer. Another woman, Angela, said Cheryl fined her for inappropriate Halloween decorations because her pumpkins attracted wildlife. I compiled everything: the footage, the financial records, the testimonies. I even found a document Cheryl had filed months ago pushing for the HOA to reclaim unused peripheral land. Guess what land was marked in red ink? Mine. I sent it all to Colin. He looped in the Bureau's Property Crimes Division. Apparently this wasn't just arson anymore, it was conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering. 2 weeks later, unmarked SUVs rolled into Pine Crest Ridge. I was sipping coffee on my porch when they arrived. Cheryl was hosting one of her mandatory beautification meetings at the clubhouse. I followed them on foot as they marched in, all black suits and stone faces. The moment they said her name, Cheryl's smug expression cracked. "What is this?" she barked. "You can't just barge in here." The lead agent held up a warrant. "We can." And we are. She looked around at the stunned HOA board members. "This has to be some mistake. I built this community. I am this community." They cuffed her right there in front of the podium, and I swear to God I laughed. I laughed like someone who just watched karma hit terminal velocity. But this wasn't over. Not yet. I still had to rebuild, still had to make things right. And I wasn't the only one Cheryl had hurt. Now that she was gone, it was time to clean house for real. The morning after Cheryl was arrested, the neighborhood felt different, like the air had been cleared after a long, stifling storm. People who had avoided eye contact for years were suddenly waving from their driveways. Mailboxes that once displayed neatly printed HOA violation notices now held nothing but junk mail and overdue apologies. There was a quiet hum of freedom under everything, but I knew better than to assume the storm had passed. My phone buzzed around 11. Colin was calling again. "They're digging through over a decade of records," he said without preamble. "Looks like Cheryl didn't act alone." I leaned against the porch railing, watching a pair of kids ride bikes down the main road, no reflective vests, no HOA enforcer tailing them with a clipboard. How bad are we talking? There's a paper trail tying 3 board members to embezzlement. At least one of them had banking access to the so-called fire mitigation fund. The burner phone traced near your cabin. Guess who paid for it? "Let me guess," I said. "The HOA's Community Development Slush Fund." "Bingo," Colin replied. "It gets worse. They've been pressuring homeowners into selling land parcels under the table, lowball offers, threats of manufactured fines if they refuse. Your place was next in line." That explained the sudden uptick in harassment over the last few months. I had wondered why they'd started pushing harder. Now I knew they weren't just being petty, they were following a timeline. "What's the play now?" I asked. "Federal charges are going to take time," he said. "But the sheriff's office is cooperating. There's enough for obstruction, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Meanwhile, the county is considering freezing the HOA's assets." I hung up and stared at the charred patch where the cabin used to stand. Half of the blackened foundation remained, surrounded by yellow police tape. I'd been told not to touch anything until the investigation wrapped, so I spent my time elsewhere. That afternoon, I walked down to Greg's place. He was in his garage, hunched over a vintage motorcycle he'd been rebuilding for years. He looked up, his hands stained with engine grease. "You hear the latest?" he asked. "Just got off the phone with someone who would know," I said. "It's not just Cheryl." "Figured as much," he muttered, tossing a rag onto a stool. "She never could have done all this alone. You know, she tried to get my property appraised without telling me. Claimed it was part of a neighborhood valuation initiative. That legal, not even a little," he said, "but she had people believing it." Angela showed up not long after, carrying a folder thick with documents. "Found these in a neighborhood group chat," she said, flipping through screenshots. "Turns out Cheryl was promising certain residents priority status if they voted her way, more like hush money without the cash." I took the folder and paged through it. Every screenshot had a timestamp. Every message had names tied to them. Some were residents I'd seen at the clubhouse meetings, people who always nodded along, who never seemed to get fined or warned. She bought loyalty, I said, and used it to bury opposition. Angela nodded. One woman got her entire driveway repaved on the HOA's dime. Said it was part of an accessibility upgrade. She walks 5 miles every morning. I spent the next 2 days compiling everything into a digital archive: testimonies, photos, financial links, the burner phone records, even the list of parcels targeted for reclamation. I labeled everything by category and uploaded it to a secure drive. Then I sent a copy to the Bureau's investigative unit handling the case, along with a note. This is systemic. She didn't just break the rules, she rewrote them. The following Monday, the county sent a representative to hold an emergency town meeting. His name was Darren McMillan, a tall man with a tired face and the kind of voice that made you stop mid-sentence. He set up shop at the community center, the same one Cheryl used to commandeer like a throne room. I sat near the back, alongside Greg and Angela. The room was packed, over 80 residents crammed into folding chairs, standing along the walls, even perched on window sills. Darren stepped up to the front and wasted no time. "You've all seen what's been happening," he began. "I'm here to inform you that the Pine Crest Ridge Homeowners Association's legal authority has been suspended pending a full audit. All enforcement actions are frozen. No fines, no liens, no approvals required for home maintenance until further notice." A wave of stunned murmurs rippled through the room. Greg leaned over. "That's the first time I've heard silence in this place that wasn't fear," Darren continued. "We've identified at least 16 residents who were fined illegally. Those fines will be reversed. If you were pressured into selling land, contact the district office immediately. Our attorneys are preparing restitution claims." A man in the front row stood up. "What happens to the board members who aren't under investigation?" Darren looked him in the eye. "They've been removed. This community will vote to re-establish a new governance structure under county oversight." Another woman raised her hand. "What about Cheryl?" That got some laughter. Darren didn't smile. "She's facing multiple federal charges. That process is underway. I can't speak further." After the meeting, I stepped outside to find 3 reporters waiting by the entrance. One of them recognized me from the footage that had leaked, me handing over the evidence, the footage of the hooded figure near my cabin, the confrontation at the clubhouse. "Mr. Voss," a woman with a press badge said, "can we ask what motivated you to take on the HOA?" I looked past her, at the ridge overlooking where my cabin used to be. "My grandfather built that with his own hands. They burned it down because they thought no one would fight back." Turns out they were wrong. The next morning, I got a call from the district attorney's office. They wanted a formal deposition. I agreed, drove down to the county seat, and met with a prosecutor named Reena Patel. She was sharp, quick-witted, and had already read everything I'd submitted. "We're building the case primarily around conspiracy and fraud," she told me, flipping through her notes. "But the arson is where things get personal. You're our key witness." I gave my statement under oath, recounted every detail: the threats, the footage, the pattern of behavior. When I finished, Reena closed her folder slowly. "They targeted you because you didn't bend," she said. "Most people would have moved, you didn't." "I don't scare easy," I said. "Good," she replied. "Because this case is going to get loud before it gets quiet." 2 weeks later, subpoenas were issued for 3 more former board members. One tried to flee the state. He didn't make it past Reno. Another had already drained her HOA account and moved into her sister's guest house in Oregon. The Bureau froze her assets overnight. Meanwhile, the community started coming alive again. No more anonymous complaints taped to doors. No more mandatory attendance letters for gardening infractions. The clubhouse was reopened as a shared space. Potlucks replaced enforcement meetings. Someone even painted over the HOA's old mission statement with a mural of wildflowers and pine trees. I started clearing the land where the cabin had stood. The investigators gave me the green light. I salvaged what I could: some rusted tools, a scorched cast iron skillet, and a metal box that had been hidden under the floorboards. Inside were old photographs, yellowed with age but intact. My grandfather leaning against the porch, a mug in hand, smiling like the world couldn't touch him. That night, I built a fire pit on the edge of the lot. Greg brought over folding chairs. Angela brought beer. We sat under the stars the way my grandfather used to and talked about what came next. You think they'll rebuild the HOA? Greg asked. Not like it was, I said. Not if I have anything to say about it. Angela nodded. People are awake now, that's something. I stared into the fire, letting the warmth soak through. The fight wasn't over. There were still legal battles ahead, still hearings and court dates and restitution claims, but Cheryl was gone. Her empire had crumbled, and the cabin would rise again, not just because it mattered to me, but because people like her needed to know some homes don't burn quietly, some families don't run, and when you push too hard, you don't just wake up a neighborhood, you start a fire you can't control. I rolled the last wheelbarrow of charred debris to the edge of the property by the time the first frost of November hit the ridge. The pine needles were slick with morning ice, and my boots left deep impressions in the dirt. The air was different now, not just colder, but clearer, like the place itself was breathing again. The cabin had stood for over 50 years. What was left of it fit in a single rented dumpster. I didn't rebuild right away. Not because I couldn't, but because it didn't feel right to raise new walls without seeing the old foundation cleansed, not just of ash and nails, but of the rot that had crept in from across the ridge. The day after the emergency town meeting, I'd gotten a thin envelope in the mail. It was from a law firm based out of Sacramento, one I didn't recognize. Inside was a single-page document, a cease and desist order signed by someone named Terrence D. Locke. The letter accused me of defamation against the Pine Crest Ridge HOA and demanded I remove all publicly distributed allegations within 72 hours. I brought it to Reena Patel at the DA's office. She scanned it once. This guy's not even Cheryl's attorney. He's private counsel hired by one of the other ex-board members, Denise Langford. You've probably never met her. She kept a low profile, handled their legal filtration. This is a last-ditch scare tactic. She thinks she can threaten her way out, I asked. Reena's tone sharpened. She's the one who drafted the land acquisition documents, the ones listing your property. We found her signature on 6 fraudulent title transfers. Colin, who joined us for the meeting, leaned forward. Langford's smart. She kept her hands clean with money, but she's knee-deep in forgery. Reena nodded. And she's about to find out that forging signatures on land deeds is a felony with mandatory sentencing. I left the DA's office with the letter in my pocket and a new understanding in my head. Cheryl had been the face, but Denise was the spine. She played cleanup. She was the reason Cheryl's abuses went unchecked for so long. And now that Cheryl was in custody, Denise was trying to sever herself from the wreckage, but the net was tightening. 2 days later, a county investigator named Micah Alvarez visited me with a digital tablet under his arm. He'd been assigned to the audit team combing through Pine Crest Ridge's internal records. We sat on my back porch while he walked me through what they'd uncovered. We found something odd, he said, tapping the screen. There's a series of emails between Denise Langford and a contractor out of Redding, unlicensed off books. They were paid in cash to remove structures obstructing future developments. You're telling me someone was hired to destroy my cabin? I asked. Micah looked grim. Not directly, but the language is vague on purpose. The payment logs show 3 payments made over 6 months, totaling just under $20,000. That contractor's van was caught by a traffic cam entering this area the night before the fire. I stood up, blood hammering in my ears. Do you have a name? Marcus Bledsoe. Ex-con. Priors for arson for hire in Arizona. He disappeared 2 days after the fire. No known address. We're working with state police to find him. So now it was real, not just suspicion, not a hunch. They hadn't just torched a building. They'd hired a professional criminal, paid in cash, with the explicit purpose of clearing property they had no right to touch. I looked out at the ridge where the burned trees still stood like blackened fingers against the sky. They treated my land like it was theirs. Micah nodded. And we're going to treat their case like what it is: organized crime. By the end of that week, Arrest warrants had been issued for Denise Langford and two other former board members. One of them, a man named Dwight Cormack, was picked up at a private golf club in Tahoe. The other, a woman named Lisa Tran, surrendered quietly after a lawyer advised her to cooperate. Denise, however, vanished. She didn't show up at her law office. Her house sat dark for days. Her car was found abandoned outside a shuttered medical plaza in Stockton. County investigators, the Bureau, and the California State Attorney's Office put her on the most wanted list for white-collar fugitives. A reward was issued. Angela called me the morning it hit the news. She's running. That's basically a confession, right? Doesn't matter, I said. She won't stay gone. People like that think they're too smart to get caught, but they always make one mistake. That mistake came the following Monday. A bank manager in Santa Rosa flagged a woman trying to withdraw $15,000 in cash using a fake ID. The name on the license was fake, but the face was Denise's. Surveillance footage confirmed it. She was in custody by nightfall. When I walked into the next town meeting, the atmosphere had mutated from fear to fury. Residents who had once whispered about violations now stood up and demanded accountability. Greg had printed out a spreadsheet showing how much each household had been overcharged for community maintenance over the past 5 years. A retired woman named Nora brought a notarized statement revealing that Cheryl had sent her a falsified fine for a mailbox replacement that never happened. The county administrator, Darren, stood by the podium with a legal pad, taking down names and assigning claim numbers. What had started as a single act of arson had unraveled the entire HOA like a rotten rope under pressure. After the meeting, I made my way back to the edge of my property, where the land dipped slightly before rising into the ridge. The soil was still dark in places, but I'd cleared enough to stake out a new footprint, not a replica of the old cabin, something better, stronger. I'd hired a local architect who specialized in fire-resistant materials and low-impact builds. He met me there the next morning, blueprints in hand. His name was Ellis, a quiet guy who preferred sketches to small talk. He laid the plans across the hood of his truck. No wood siding, he said. Steel framing, concrete paneling, fireproof insulation, solar built in. You'll be able to run this place off-grid if you want. I nodded. That's the idea. He tapped a section of the layout. This part here, guest room, community space, I said. For meetings, for people who want to organize things without being bullied into it. Ellis gave a quiet nod, then packed up his drawings. We'll break ground this month. By the end of that week, the first restitution checks were mailed out. The county had frozen the HOA's assets and liquidated their reserve funds. It wasn't enough to undo all the damage they'd caused, but it was a start. Then came the court dates. I testified against Denise in a packed courtroom, flanked by Reena Patel and 2 federal prosecutors. She sat across from me, no longer the composed professional in tailored suits, but a pale, drawn woman in county-issued beige. Her lawyer tried to claim she'd been manipulated by Cheryl, but the paper trail destroyed that narrative. I spoke clearly. I told the court how she'd targeted land that didn't belong to them, how she'd orchestrated silence behind legal jargon, how she'd signed documents that would have erased my family's legacy without blinking. When I stepped down from the stand, I didn't look back. The judge sentenced her to 15 years for conspiracy, wire fraud, and property crimes. Cheryl's case was still ongoing, but her bail had been denied. The others took plea deals. Most would serve time. Some were barred from participating in any future housing association or nonprofit for life. By the time the first snow dusted the ridge, the frame of the new structure was already up. Steel beams cut sharp lines across the horizon, anchored deep in concrete pylons. Greg helped me install the first window. Angela brought over a time capsule, a small metal box filled with letters from neighbors, photos of the old cabin, and a list of every single fraudulent fine Cheryl had ever issued. We buried it beneath the main entryway. I never thought I'd see this place get rebuilt, Angela said, brushing hair from her eyes. Let alone be part of it. I looked at the beams overhead. It's not about rebuilding what was lost. It's about making sure it never happens again, Greg grinned. You think we should start our own HOA? Call it the Leave People Alone Association. Only if the bylaws are written in crayon, I said. We laughed, and it felt honest. The cabin would be finished by spring. But the neighborhood had already changed. Without Cheryl and her circle of tyrants, people started doing what communities were supposed to do: help each other. Fix things, share stories, watch out for one another without surveillance. As for me, I didn't care about power, I just wanted peace. And I'd fought hard enough to make sure I'd earned it. The fire had taken everything, but it also revealed what needed to burn. The first robin landed on the half-finished roof the same day the jury returned their verdict in Cheryl's case. I was standing beside Ellis, watching his crew install the last of the fire-resistant shingles when the news alert buzzed across his phone. He handed it to me wordlessly, letting me read the headline myself. Former HOA President Cheryl Mathers convicted on all counts. Below it, a list of charges longer than most people's resumes: mail fraud, insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit arson, criminal misappropriation of community funds, tampering with public records. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Ellis let out a low whistle. That's not just guilty, that's scorched earth guilty. I handed the phone back without responding. I wasn't celebrating, not yet. Not until I stood in that courtroom and watched the sentence fall from the judge's mouth like a gavel made of stone. 2 days later, I sat in the back row of the county courthouse, next to Angela and Greg, while Cheryl stood before the bench in a wrinkled navy suit that looked 2 sizes too large. Her hands trembled, though whether from nerves or indignation, it was hard to say. Her lawyer made a final plea for leniency, citing community service and years of unrecognized volunteer work. Judge Whitaker, a man known for his dry sarcasm and intolerance for manipulation, stared at her like she just asked to rewrite the penal code. You used your position to intimidate, exploit, and endanger the people you claim to serve, he said. You orchestrated a campaign of fear so you could seize what wasn't yours. You didn't just betray your neighbors. You corrupted an entire system designed for community support. Cheryl opened her mouth as if to correct him. He held up a hand. You had your say. Now you'll have your sentence. He read the numbers like they were carved in concrete. 23 years in state prison, without possibility of parole for 15. You will also be required to pay restitution to all affected households, and you are legally prohibited from serving on any board, trust, or fiduciary position for the remainder of your life. Cheryl blinked once. Her knees buckled slightly. No one moved to help her. Angela leaned closer and whispered. She thought she'd get a slap on the wrist. Greg didn't take his eyes off the bench. She thought she was untouchable. Outside the courthouse, the reporters swarmed, but I kept my head down, hands in my jacket pockets. I wasn't there to gloat. I was there to finish what had been started. Cheryl's conviction was the final nail in the coffin for the corrupted HOA, but it would take more than prison bars to rebuild trust among neighbors who'd been divided for years. The county had officially dissolved the original HOA charter the week prior. What remained of its assets were placed under third-party management while a new community council was being formed. This time, it wouldn't be a closed board. It would be a rotating panel of residents, elected publicly, with term limits and full financial transparency. I hadn't planned on joining. I'd fought my war. I figured it was time to let others take the wheel. But then I got a knock on my door. It was Nora, the retired school teacher who'd been fined for a mailbox replacement that never happened. She held a clipboard and a determined look in her eyes. "We need someone who doesn't flinch," she said. "Someone who won't forget what happens when no one's watching." I hesitated. "You don't have to run things," she added, "just help shape the rules. We've seen what happens when they're written to protect power instead of people." I took the clipboard. Let's make sure this place never forgets. When the new council was formed, I agreed to serve on the initial oversight committee. My role was to review all proposed enforcement policies before they were passed. No fines without documentation, no anonymous reports without corroboration, no more secret meetings. Every decision had to be logged, archived, and accessible. The first policy we passed banned any single individual from holding more than one position on the committee at a time. The second required quarterly audits by an independent accountant. The third allowed any homeowner to attend meetings and speak without time restrictions. It wasn't just about rules. It was about removing the fear that had settled like rot under Cheryl's regime. You could see it in the way neighbors started helping each other again. Greg built raised garden beds for two elderly couples on the north slope. Angela organized a weekend repair crew to fix up the community trail Cheryl had tried to gate off the year before. I donated the new community space inside my rebuilt cabin for monthly gatherings. No agendas. Just coffee, conversation, and planning sessions for things that actually mattered, like wildfire prevention and snow removal coordination. The sheriff's office also started a neighborhood liaison program, appointing a deputy to attend every quarterly meeting. Not to enforce anything, but to keep the channels open and the relationship transparent. His name was Deputy Carson, and he quickly became a fixture at potlucks and clean-up days. It was a few weeks after Cheryl's sentencing when I finally got a call from the state fire investigator. They'd located the man who'd lit the match. Marcus Bledsoe, the ex-con contractor hired by Denise, had been arrested during a routine traffic stop in Idaho. He was traveling under a fake name with a stolen vehicle and a backpack full of burner phones. Once ID'd, he was extradited to California, where he was now facing a slate of charges, including aggravated arson, destruction of protected property, and conspiracy to defraud. I drove down to the station to meet with the lead investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Captain Renee Devereaux, who'd been spearheading the wildfire crime unit since the previous summer. "He's not talking," she said, flipping open a folder, "but we don't need him to. We've got the money trail, the burner phone records, and the footage you pulled from your security camera. He's going away for a long time." I studied the booking photo. A gaunt man in his 40s with eyes like cracked glass. He looked like someone who didn't expect to get caught. Captain Devereaux folded her arms. "Thing is, this isn't the first time someone's tried to weaponize arson for property control. But it's one of the first times we've had clear enough evidence to prosecute it as part of a larger organized effort. You think it'll stick?" "Oh, it'll stick," she said. "We're building a precedent here. People like Cheryl and Denise thought no one would connect the dots, but you did. You left a trail of fire breaks behind you." I returned to the ridge feeling lighter, though I couldn't say why. The cabin was nearly finished. The new windows reflected the sky in sharp angles. The pine trees around it were already beginning to heal, new growth curling up from blackened roots. One afternoon, I walked the property line and found a small wooden stake left behind from the original survey Cheryl had used. It was meant to mark the edge of land she planned to seize. I pulled it from the ground and carried it inside. I mounted it beside the new fireplace as a reminder. Not of what they tried to take, but of what they couldn't touch. By the time spring rolled around, the last restitution checks had been issued. Every homeowner who'd been wronged received compensation. Some used it to repair their homes. Some donated it to the community fund. No one used it to leave. They stayed. And they stood together. The cabin opened officially on the first Saturday of April. We held a ribbon-cutting ceremony with no ribbon, just a circle of neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder. Greg brought his old record player. Angela made lemon bars. Kids ran barefoot across the deck, laughing without looking over their shoulders for permission. I didn't give a speech. I just opened the door and let people in, because that was the point. Cheryl's reign had ended in handcuffs and headlines. But what mattered more was what came after. The silence that followed her voice was filled with something better. Conversation, collaboration, and the sound of a place healing. We didn't just survive her fire. We rebuilt from the ashes. And this time, we made sure no one could light the match again.